Hello everyone. At 76, Dee Wallace has finally opened up about the memories she kept hidden behind the scenes of E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial. The film shaped the childhood of millions, yet it also left her with quiet struggles few ever knew. In this video, I'll share 5 names, colleagues who once stood by her side, yet with whom Dee never truly found common ground. This isn't about blame, but about a late-in-life confession, bittersweet, heartfelt, and deeply human. Henry Thomas, the name that quietly unsettled Dee Wallace on the set of E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial. What unsettled Dee most, however, wasn't Henry himself, but the way others treated him. Directors, crew members, even visiting executives all seemed entranced by his presence. They laughed at his rare jokes, leaned in when he spoke, showered him with the kind of reverence usually reserved for seasoned stars. Dee couldn't help but feel the imbalance, like an adult, standing on the sidelines of her own film. She had worked for years to build her craft, to understand her characters deeply, to bring truth to every gesture and line. And yet, here was a child talented, yes, but still a child who instantly commanded the room in a way she never could. One memory stayed with her more than most. During a late-night shoot, the crew was exhausted and the atmosphere heavy. Dee tried to lighten the mood, cracking a soft joke about the endless retakes. A few chuckles rippled through the set, but then Henry, with his dry, boyish wit, added a single remark. The room erupted in laughter, genuine and rolling. Dee smiled outwardly, but inside, she felt herself shrink. It was not jealousy in the bitter sense, it was more like a reminder that her voice carried less weight, that her years of experience could be outshone by the spontaneity of a boy half her height. Over time, these small moments piled up. Each one was like a paper cut, never devastating, but undeniably stinging. To the world, E.T. was a joyful memory, a symbol of unity and wonder. To Dee, it was also tinged with the ache of feeling peripheral, even in the story she was supposed to mother. She respected Henry, admired his gifts, but could not ignore the undercurrent of frustration that lingered whenever she thought of him. When she finally spoke his name decades later, listing him among those she had the hardest time with, it wasn't a confession meant to tarnish him. It was a release, a way of acknowledging that even in the most beloved films, the backstage truths can be complicated. Henry Thomas, the boy who made the world cry, also made his on-screen mother feel unseen. And yet, Dee's honesty carried no venom. She didn't call him arrogant, nor did she accuse him of cruelty. Instead, she revealed the subtler pain of imbalance, the quiet sorrow of being overshadowed. In doing so, she offered audiences a deeper glimpse into the cost of storytelling, where not every light can shine equally bright. For viewers, the revelation is bittersweet. They can still adore Henry's Elliot, still weep when he says goodbye to his alien friend. But now they also carry Dee's perspective in their hearts, the reminder that even the brightest performances can leave shadows behind. And in naming Henry, not as an enemy but as a source of struggle, Dee Wallace gave voice to something many artists quietly endure, the longing not just to be seen, but to be recognized as essential. At 76, she no longer needs the spotlight. She has lived, she has given, she has loved. But in speaking Henry's name, she reclaimed a truth that had been hers alone for decades. And perhaps in doing so, she found a measure of peace not in diminishing him, but in finally affirming herself. Henry Thomas, the boy who brought Elliot to life, was a wonder in the eyes of audiences around the world. To millions, he became the very heart of E.T., a fragile yet determined child who dared to believe in friendship beyond the stars. For decades, his tearful farewell to the little alien has been replayed on television screens, in theaters, and in the memories of families who grew up with the film. To the public, Henry was not just an actor. He was innocence captured on celluloid, a living reminder of childhood's courage and tenderness. But for Dee Wallace, who played the worried, loving mother on screen, Henry represented something far more complicated. She never denied his talent, how could she? Even at such a young age, he carried the movie on his shoulders with a natural grace that few adult actors could have managed. Yet behind that grace, Dee often felt a prickling discomfort, a tension she rarely voiced. Henry was not simply a co-star. In her eyes, he was both the center of attention and the source of a subtle imbalance that shaped her entire experience on set. Dee once described the feeling as living next to a light so bright that it cast shadows you didn't know existed. Henry's brilliance was undeniable, but in that brilliance, there was also an unspoken hierarchy. Everyone bent toward him. Every camera, every director's note, every ounce of energy seemed to orbit around the young boy. As the mother figure, Dee was supposed to be the anchor of the story, the steady hand that made Elliot's vulnerability believable. Yet she often felt invisible, as though her role existed only to prop up Henry's shining performance. It wasn't that Henry ever acted out or behaved cruelly. In truth, he was polite, even shy, a child thrown into a world of adults and endless expectations. His quietness was disarming, but also strangely isolating. He rarely sought Dee out, rarely exchanged more than the words necessary for the scene. To her, it created a wall of distance, an invisible glass between them. She longed for warmth, for the kind of bond that could translate naturally into the mother-son relationship on screen. Instead, she often found herself rehearsing alone, trying to imagine the intimacy that wasn't there. Peter Coyote, the commanding presence that left Dee Wallace uneasy in E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial. For Dee, who valued collaboration and kindness, this was painful. She wanted to believe in an ensemble spirit, in a team where every voice mattered. But with Peter, she often felt the old Hollywood hierarchy at play, the idea that certain voices naturally deserved the spotlight, while others existed in supporting roles. And though she admired his professionalism, she could not ignore the way his shadow stretched across her experience. What made it worse was the audience's perception. To viewers, Peter was the quintessential adult presence in E.T., the man who gave the film its gravitas. Critics praised his subtlety, his understated menace, his ability to embody authority without turning cartoonish. And all of it was deserved. But for Dee, those very qualities that won him admiration were also the source of her unease. He was too commanding, too composed, too effortlessly central to ignore. Decades later, when she named him among the colleagues she struggled with, she did so without venom. She did not accuse him of cruelty or arrogance. Instead, she revealed a truth that resonated with many who had worked in his orbit, that sometimes the hardest colleagues are not the loudest or the cruelest, but the ones whose very presence makes you feel invisible. Her honesty reframed Peter Coyote not as a villain, but as a mirror. A mirror reflecting the power dynamics that silently shape film sets and, by extension, entire careers. For some, his authority was reassuring. For Dee, it was suffocating. And in finally admitting that, she gave voice to a struggle countless artists face: the difficulty of finding space to breathe beside someone who consumes all the oxygen without ever meaning harm. At 76, Dee Wallace no longer needed to carry that silence. By naming Peter, she was not tearing him down, but lifting herself up, acknowledging that her discomfort mattered, that her voice deserved to be heard, even if it trembled in the shadow of a stronger one. She respected Peter's talent, recognized his impact, but also reclaimed her own truth: that brilliance can inspire and still wound, that authority can command respect and still silence others. In the end, Peter Coyote remained the dignified figure audiences remembered, a man whose presence defined a generation of film and television. But for Dee, he was also the reminder that even in stories about love and connection, some connections never formed. And by finally speaking his name, she found the courage to say what had weighed on her for decades: that sometimes the hardest thing in art is not what you give, but what you lose in the presence of someone larger than life. To the public, Peter Coyote has always been more than just an actor. With his tall frame, calm voice, and intellectual air, He embodied a kind of quiet authority that made him unforgettable on screen. In E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial, he stepped into the role of the government agent, a figure both threatening and strangely sympathetic. For audiences, he was the adult world intruding on the innocence of childhood, the reminder that not every grown-up was a villain, yet not every grown-up was safe. He gave the film its tension, its sense of realism. Children feared him, but adults nodded in recognition. Here was a man who could belong in both cinema and real life, equal parts menacing and believable. Dee Wallace respected that image, perhaps more than she ever admitted out loud. She knew Peter was not only an actor but a thinker, someone with years of experience in theater, activism, and storytelling. On set, he carried himself with a calm assurance, the kind of poise that made people listen. He didn't need to raise his voice. A single glance, a measured tone, and suddenly the room leaned toward him. To many, it was magnetic. To Dee, it was intimidating in ways that quietly gnawed at her. She never described Peter as unkind. In fact, he was often courteous, professional, even generous with advice. But there was a quality in his presence that left her feeling smaller. Every conversation seemed to tilt toward him. Every decision on set seemed to carry more weight when he spoke. For a woman striving to establish her own ground, especially in an industry that often overlooked female voices, this was not just frustrating, it was heartbreaking. One afternoon during shooting, Dee recalled sharing her interpretation of a particularly emotional scene. She wanted to bring more subtlety to her performance, to portray not just a frightened mother but a woman balancing fear with fierce protectiveness. Before she could finish, Peter interjected calmly, without hostility, offering his own take on how the scene might play better. The director listened intently, nodding, while Dee's words faded into the background. It wasn't malicious, it was natural. Peter spoke, and the room responded. Dee smiled politely, but inside she felt that old, familiar sting. Her voice once again carried less weight. That was the pattern. Peter didn't dominate through arrogance, he dominated through presence. It was the way he walked onto a set, the way his voice cut through the air like a low, steady drum. People trusted him, deferred to him, almost without realizing it. And Dee, who had always been careful, thoughtful, and committed, often found herself overshadowed not because her ideas lacked merit, but because Peter's aura commanded more immediate respect. She described it once, years later, as standing next to a man who fills the room without trying, while you're still searching for a corner to call your own. That quiet imbalance left a mark. It was not the kind of conflict that erupts into arguments or tabloid headlines. It was subtler, more insidious. A smile here, a nod there, and yet beneath it all, the unshakable feeling of being diminished. Drew Barrymore, the child star whose boundless energy wore down Dee Wallace on the set of E.T., the Extra-Terrestrial. She often found herself slipping into a real, maternal role, not just guiding Drew through lines, but calming her when she grew restless, keeping her focused when she wandered. It was rewarding at times, but it also blurred boundaries. Dee was there as a colleague, not as a babysitter, yet too often the line felt invisible. What made it harder was the way everyone adored Drew's antics. Every giggle, every slip of the tongue was met with applause, as if she could do no wrong. Dee couldn't deny Drew's natural charisma, but she couldn't help feeling the imbalance. Her own professionalism, years of training and craft, seemed to vanish into the background whenever Drew lit up the room with her unfiltered innocence. It was as if the grown-ups had become the supporting cast for a child's uncontainable sparkle. Decades later, Dee spoke of Drew with affection, but also with candor. She admitted that the little girl she once mothered on screen was one of the most difficult colleagues she ever had, not because Drew was cruel or arrogant, but because she was simply too much. Too much energy, too much spontaneity, too much of everything. For Dee, who valued focus and respect for process, that too much was both enchanting and exhausting. Her honesty reframed the way people saw Drew's role in E.T. audiences, remembered the charm, the laughter, the irresistible cuteness. Dee remembered the sleepless nights, the frayed patience, the quiet moments when she longed for calm that never came. And in speaking Drew's name, she gave voice to a truth many adults feel but rarely admit, that children, for all their joy, can also be overwhelming, even to those who love them. Yet Dee's words carried no malice. She didn't dismiss Drew's gift or deny her impact. Instead, she acknowledged the duality, how someone can be both a blessing and a burden, both joy and fatigue. It was the kind of honesty only a seasoned actress at 76 could offer, stripped of envy, rich with perspective. For audiences, this revelation added a new layer to their beloved memories. They could still laugh with Drew's Gertie, still treasure her wide-eyed innocence. But now they also saw the cost behind the magic, the labor of patience, the toll of chaos, the quiet sacrifices of a mother figure both on and off screen. In the end, Drew Barrymore remained the beloved child star who grew into a Hollywood icon. But for Dee Wallace, she was also the reminder that behind every adorable performance lies a hidden story of effort, compromise, and sometimes exhaustion. By naming her, Dee wasn't criticizing a child, she was honoring her own truth as an adult who carried the weight of making the film work. At 76, Dee's reflection on Drew was not about blame, it was about balance. About recognizing that even the sweetest joys can leave behind shadows of fatigue, and that speaking of those shadows is not unkind, it is human. And perhaps, in sharing this, Dee offered something valuable to her audience. The permission to admit that love and weariness can coexist, that cherishing someone does not erase the struggles they bring. In that, her honesty became not just a story about a movie, but a story about life itself. Few child actors have ever captured the world's heart the way Drew Barrymore did. At just 7 years old, with her curly hair and mischievous eyes, she became the face of innocence and wonder in E.T., the Extra-Terrestrial. As little Gertie, she brought comic relief, tenderness, and that unforgettable wide-eyed scream when she first laid eyes on the alien. To audiences everywhere, Drew was pure delight, the embodiment of childhood's charm. Her presence gave the film a warmth that balanced its tension and turned it into a family story for the ages. But for Dee Wallace, Drew's presence was something more complicated. As a mother herself, Dee adored the little girl, even spoiled her at times, watching her light up every corner of the set with laughter and energy. Yet beneath that affection lay a deeper fatigue, a quiet frustration that Dee carried with her for years. Drew's spontaneity, her unfiltered enthusiasm, often came at a cost not only to the rhythm of the set, but to Dee's own emotional space. Unlike Henry Thomas, who was shy and serious, Drew was a whirlwind. She bounced from one corner of the studio to the next, chattering, giggling, demanding attention in the way only a child can. Everyone loved it. The crew doted on her, the director indulged her, and her unpredictability often led to moments of magic on camera. But behind the scenes, it also meant delays, interruptions, and a constant shifting of focus. For Dee, who valued discipline and preparation, this energy could feel overwhelming. One memory stayed with her vividly. They were filming a family dinner scene simple on paper, but requiring careful timing. Dee had spent time preparing, rehearsing her beats, ensuring the moment felt authentic. Just as the cameras rolled, Drew launched into an unscripted giggle fit, sparked by something only she found funny. The crew chuckled, the director let it play out, and the scene dissolved into chaos. Later, it was praised as adorably real, but Dee remembered feeling deflated. Her careful work had been tossed aside, replaced by the raw charm of a child's outburst. It wasn't jealousy. Dee never envied Drew's spotlight. It was exhaustion. The unpredictability drained her, left her struggling to maintain the emotional steadiness her role demanded. To play the mother of 3 children on screen, she needed patience. But to work with Drew day after day required a patience that stretched far beyond the camera's reach. Robert MacNaughton, the quiet rivalry that unsettled Dee Wallace in E.T., the Extra-Terrestrial. Decades later, when Dee listed Robert among the colleagues she struggled with most, her words surprised many. To the public, Robert was the least controversial of the cast, steady, understated, almost invisible compared to the others. But that invisibility, Dee revealed, was part of the problem. He worked so hard not to be overlooked that he sometimes overlooked her instead. His need to assert himself, to be taken seriously, often left her feeling diminished. Her honesty reframed Robert's role in E.T. audiences, saw the dependable older brother, the anchor of the kids' adventure. Dee saw the quiet tug-of-war behind the scenes, a young actor striving for independence, a seasoned actress striving for connection, and the friction that grew between those two desires. Yet even here, Dee's tone was not bitter. She spoke of Robert with a kind of weary understanding, as if time had softened the edges of the rivalry. She recognized his struggle, even respected it. He wanted what every young actor wants: to be taken seriously, to carve out an identity in a story dominated by others. She could never fault him for that, but she also could not deny the cost, the emotional distance, the small dismissals, the moments when she felt unseen in the very role meant to embody visibility. For viewers, this confession added a layer of poignancy to their memories of E.T. They could still cherish Michael's loyalty, his banter, his protective instincts. But now, they also glimpsed the quieter story beneath the story of two actors, one young and searching, one older and steady, struggling to find harmony while playing mother and son. At 76, Dee Wallace no longer needed to compete for space. By naming Robert, she wasn't condemning him. She was acknowledging a truth, that even the gentlest rivalries can leave lasting marks, that the smallest dismissals can echo for decades. In the end, Robert MacNaughton remained the understated heart of E.T., the brother audiences grew to love. But for Dee, he was also a reminder of the fragile balance between guidance and independence, between connection and competition. By finally speaking his name, she gave herself permission to admit that even love and respect can coexist with disappointment. And in that admission, she reminded her audience of something universal, that families, whether real or fictional, are never without tension, and that sometimes the quietest rivalries leave the deepest scars. To most viewers, Robert MacNaughton's role as Michael, the older brother in E.T., was one of warmth and reliability. He was the skeptical teenager who eventually softened, the sibling who teased but ultimately protected, the bridge between childhood wonder and adolescent responsibility. For many, Robert gave the film a sense of grounding. His presence balanced Elliot's vulnerability and Gertie's innocence, shaping the Taylor family into something audiences could truly believe in. For Dee Wallace, however, Robert's presence carried a different weight. On screen, she was his mother. Off-screen, she often felt like his rival. Not in the sense of open hostility or sharp words, Robert was never cruel, never arrogant. But in the rhythm of the set, in the subtle gestures and glances, Dee felt a quiet competition, as if Robert was constantly staking out space that overlapped with her own. Unlike Henry Thomas, whose performance demanded attention, or Drew Barrymore, whose energy commanded affection, Robert had no spotlight thrust upon him. Instead, he carved his presence carefully, deliberately, with a seriousness unusual for his age. He wanted to be seen as professional, as more than just the kid brother. That determination, while admirable, sometimes translated into a low hum of rivalry, especially with Dee, the adult tasked with anchoring the family dynamic. She recalled moments when Robert would question directions, not rudely, but with the air of someone trying to assert independence. If Dee offered guidance, he sometimes bristled, as if her maternal instincts on screen had no place in the rehearsal room. He wanted to prove himself, Dee later reflected, and in proving himself, he often felt like he needed to prove me wrong. One evening, during rehearsals for a key family scene, Dee suggested a small adjustment, how Robert might react more naturally to a line of hers. It was the kind of note she often shared with younger co-stars, a gentle attempt to build chemistry. Robert listened, nodded politely, and then did the scene exactly his own way. The director approved, praising Robert's choice. Dee smiled outwardly, but inside, she felt a sting of dismissal, not just of her idea, but of her role as both mentor and mother. That sting repeated itself in countless small ways. Robert's independence, his subtle defiance, created a quiet friction that Dee rarely voiced. To others, it looked like healthy growth, a young actor finding his footing. But to Dee, it often felt like rejection. She was there to create cohesion, to make the family feel real. Yet Robert, in carving his own space, sometimes pulled away, leaving her with the uncomfortable sense that her presence was unnecessary. It wasn't all tension. There were moments of laughter, moments of genuine warmth when Robert let his guard down. Dee never denied those, but the undercurrent of rivalry remained, like a thread woven into every interaction. Not hateful, not even intentional, just there, humming quietly in the background. K.C. Martell, the background presence that quietly frayed Dee Wallace's patience in E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial. What made it harder was the fact that others brushed it off. To the crew, his antics were harmless. To the other kids, they were funny. To Spielberg, they were manageable. Only to Dee, who bore the responsibility of holding the family unit together, did they feel like real disruptions. And because she didn't want to be seen as difficult or overly critical, she kept her frustration private, smiling through it while swallowing the fatigue. Decades later, when Dee included K.C. Martell among the colleagues she had the hardest time with, it startled many. How could such a minor figure matter enough to mention? But that was exactly the point. It wasn't the magnitude of his role that left an impression, it was the frequency of his interruptions, the constant tug at the edges of her focus, the way he turned what should have been fleeting background work into an ongoing challenge. Her honesty shed light on something audiences rarely consider, that even the smallest roles can shape the experience of a production. For Dee, K.C. symbolized the 1,000 tiny distractions that chip away at an actor's emotional core. Not dramatic betrayals, not cruel dismissals, just the steady drip of disruption that makes an already difficult job even harder. Yet even here, Dee's tone was not harsh. She didn't call him disrespectful. She didn't deny that he was just a boy, learning, craving validation. What she revealed was something subtler. That sometimes the hardest colleagues are not those who wield power or command attention, but those who flutter constantly at the edges, never still long enough to allow others to breathe. For audiences, this confession reframed the memory of K.C. Martell. He was no longer just a forgettable kid on a bike. He was the embodiment of a truth every adult knows, that even small distractions can leave lasting scars, that even background noise can make the music harder to hear. At 76, Dee Wallace finally named him not to belittle, not to shame, but to honor her own experience. By admitting that his presence drained her patience, she gave voice to something unspoken, that every set, like every family, has its hidden frictions. And those frictions, however small, stay with us. In the end, K.C. Martell remained a footnote in cinematic history. But for Dee, he was also a symbol of the countless unseen struggles that shape an artist's journey. By speaking his name, she wasn't rewriting history, she was completing it, filling in the blanks left behind by nostalgia. And in doing so, she reminded her audience of something essential, that behind every beloved story lies another. Quieter story, the story of effort interrupted, of patience tested, of the human costs hidden in the glow of cinema's most magical illusions. For most audiences, K.C. Martell was barely more than a name in the credits. As one of Elliot's friends, his role in E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial was small, tucked into the edges of the adventure. He rode bikes, shouted lines, filled in the background of the children's world. Few people remembered his face decades later, and fewer still could recall his character's name. To the public, K.C. was one of many kids who fleshed out Spielberg's vision of suburban childhood, a part of the ensemble, not the star. But for Dee Wallace, his presence on set was not so easily forgotten. Even minor characters can leave major impressions, and in Casey's case, the impression was one of disruption. He wasn't malicious, not even difficult in the traditional sense. He was simply loud, eager, restless, constantly reaching for attention in ways that unsettled Dee's rhythm as an actress. Unlike Drew Barrymore, whose charm was natural and irresistible, Casey's energy often felt forced. He cracked jokes between takes, interrupted conversations, and had a tendency to show off whenever he sensed eyes on him. It was the behavior of a young actor trying desperately not to be overlooked, a boy determined to make himself bigger than the small role the script allowed. Dee understood that instinct. It was human, especially for a child surrounded by brighter stars. But understanding didn't make it easier to bear. One moment stood out in her memory. They were setting up a crucial emotional scene between Elliot and his mother. The atmosphere on set was fragile, quiet, tuned to the emotional frequency Spielberg wanted. Just as Dee was centering herself, ready to step into the vulnerability the moment required, Casey blurted out a joke to a crew member across the room. Laughter broke out, the focus shattered, and the scene had to be reset. Dee didn't scold him, she never did, but inside, she felt the air go out of her lungs. To her, it was another reminder of how easily her emotional labor could be undone by someone who wasn't even central to the story. That pattern repeated itself more than once. Casey's enthusiasm was relentless. He was eager to please, eager to belong, but in that eagerness, he often overlooked the delicate balance required on set. For Dee, who approached every scene with careful intention, this lack of awareness was exhausting. She wanted to guide, to nurture, but with Casey, she often felt more like a disciplinarian than a collaborator. Today's story isn't meant to stir up old conflicts or create noise, but simply to share Dee Wallace's late-life reflections at the twilight of her years. Behind the bright lights, every artist carries hidden corners of their soul truths that sometimes take a lifetime to finally name. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this video, and if you feel a connection with Dee's words, please share your thoughts in the comments below.